So now in this video, I'm going to do 3 examples of how to find an inverse, or to try to find the inverse of a function. Okay, so let's start. So I'm going to do those 4 steps. Okay, so the first step here for A is I have this function, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to replace f of x with y. So I'm going to write it as y equals 2x plus 5. And then the next step is I'm going to exchange the x and the y. So I'm going to make this x equals 2y plus 5. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to now solve this for y. Okay, so what am I going to do? I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. Okay, and so that gives me x minus 5 over here equals 2y. And then what I'm going to do is, if I have 2y equals x minus 5, I'm going to divide everything by 2, right? And so then I get y equals 1/2 x minus 5 halves. Or if you want to write it, well, I would just leave it in slope-intercept form. But again, another way of writing it would just be x minus 5 divided by 2. Okay? But this is the way we would normally write it. Now, the last step, though, is to replace y with f inverse. So we are done. So this is the inverse function. So f inverse is 1/2 x minus 5 halves. And we're done. That's it for part A. Now, what about part B? Part B has this. Okay, so let's do the same thing. Now, in this case, it already has y, so we don't have to worry about replacing f of x for y, so we don't have to do the first step. But let's exchange the two. Let's make this as x equals y squared plus 2. And now let's solve this for y. So let's start by subtracting 2 from both sides. And so we get x minus 2 is equal to y squared. And so let's go over here. And we're going to write this as y squared equals x minus 2. And now, again, I've got to solve for x. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. But notice what happens when I take the square root of both sides. I have to have a plus minus because, again, it's an even power. So we're going to get an even root. Okay? So we're going to get plus or minus the square root of x minus 2. Now, this is where it falls apart. Because, as you can see, there's 2 values of y that I get for every value of x, and therefore this is not a function. This is not a function. So therefore, guess what? There's no inverse. And furthermore, since there's no inverse, this function that we started with is not 1-to-1. Okay? In fact, if you were to graph this, this is a parabola that is shifted 2 units up. And the graph of a parabola does not pass the horizontal line test. Okay? So this is not a 1-to-1 function. So therefore, the inverse does not exist. And by the way, by doing this, we actually showed that to be the case. Okay, so we're done with B. Now, what about C? Okay, well, let's do the steps, see what happens. So, now again, from your knowledge of the past sections and past videos and stuff, you might already know whether this is a 1-to-1 function or not, okay? By the basic functions, so don't forget about those basic functions. Okay, but anyway, let's use our steps. So we're going to replace f of x with y. And then the next step, we're going to interchange x and y. So we're going to make this x equals y minus 2 cubed. And then what we're going to do is now we're going to solve for y. Well, the first thing we have to do is we're going to have to take the cube root of both sides. And since this is an odd power, odd roots, we don't have any issues with the odd roots. So there's no plus or minus that we have to worry about. So if we take the cube root of x, that's going to give us y minus 2 over here. And then if I add 2 to both sides, well now I get y equals the cube root of x plus 2. And now I'm done because there's no issues with this. So now this is f inverse of x, which is equal to the cube root of x plus 2. And we're done. And so there are 3 examples of how you would use those 4 steps that I showed in the previous video of how to find the equations of inverse functions. Okay? But remember, they have to be one-to-one functions, else it won't work. Okay, have a great day.